Raise your hand if your mind has never tortured you. No one. I don't see one hand. Yeah, we each have our minds, each of us, you all have your special tricks that it likes to do with you, right? To make you unhappy. So we have the people like me who are big worriers. The future is always terrifying. And oh no, what if this happens? And oh no, what if that happens? I'll never be able to deal with it. And then we have those people whose minds like to go back into regret. And if only I had done it this way, it would all be better now. Why did I ever do that? And then, you know, you have your own version of it, right? Expectations of how things are supposed to be. Assumptions about how it's going to all turn out. I'll never forget when my father was dying. I called up my sister and said, hey, you know, Dad's, I think, really, you know, getting close to the end. And she said, he can't die. I'm not ready. It's like, honey, it's not up to you. You know, this is life. And you know, but our brains do all kinds of things to torture us and to challenge us. And if only it was just as simple as saying, let me let go of every thought that doesn't serve me. Wouldn't that be amazing if you could just say, ideas, thoughts be gone, I just love what is, in the phrase of Byron Katie. I don't know about you, but I've been working on this for 20 years, and it isn't as easy as that. How come? That's what's really interesting to me. How come it's so hard, and what can we do about making it a little bit easier? That's what I'd like to talk about this evening. A little bit about what neuroscience and psychology has to offer now as to why is it that we can't just say, well, let's just let go of all of these thoughts that are not bugging, that are torturing us. You know, I remember when I very first heard, the first time I ever heard a teacher talk about the second noble truth. And I thought, that's true. This is it. Pain is caused by wanting it to be a certain way, and happiness is a condition of letting it be okay the way it is. But why can't my mind do that? I totally understand that that's right, but I can't do it. So how come? So I'd like to talk about 3 things that we now know about why it's so hard, and then some ideas, some strategies is the word I like, as to how to deal with that. So the first is this. It has a lot to do with the way that our cortex is structured, okay? And this understanding comes from a guy named Jeff Hawken. Jeff Hawken was the inventor of the Palm Pilot. And he got really, really into his obsession was, how can I make a computer that works like the human brain? And the more he got into it, the more he said, forget computers. The human brain is so fascinating. I'm just going to study the human brain itself. I don't even care about computers anymore. And in fact, he now funds a neuroscience institute at UC Berkeley. And so this is his theory, but it's a theory that many, many neuroscientists are coming to believe, okay? And here's what it is. The cortex of our brain has horizontal fibers, all right? It has 6 or 8 layers, they're not quite sure. The bottom layers, which literally are right here, they're the ones that are taking in information about current reality. They're hearing my voice, your sight, sound, feeling. They're taking in the data about what is quote unquote real, what's happening to you right now in this present moment. Okay? That's called bottom-up processing. The reason it's called bottom-up processing is because it's coming from the bottom of our brain up to the top. So this is what's happening. The information is flooding in, coming in like this. Simultaneously, the top levels of our cortex are based on our past, are making assumptions about that information. Conclusions, assumptions, beliefs. like this, and literally not allowing information that contradicts to come through. That's called top-down processing. So this fight, as it were, between current reality, the present moment, and our beliefs, assumptions, and conclusions from the past are going on in our brains all the time. And top-down processing is the winner, usually. This is why things always turn out the way we know they're going to. I always knew, though, you cannot count on men. Yeah, because your brain already thought that, and whatever comes in that contradicts it gets kicked out. So the way that Hawken talks about it is this. He says, we push the present through a filter from the past to predict the future. We push the present through a filter from the past to predict the future. Now, this predicting the future is not all a bad thing. We would not be humans if we couldn't do this. We could not make any kinds of assumptions. We could not make conclusions. We could not say, oh, well, you know, this leads to this, so let's not do that, or let's make sure that we do. It's a wonderful thing. The problem is that it's also a dangerous thing because it doesn't allow us to fully appreciate and understand what's happening in the moment. So a dramatic story about this from my brain. And it doesn't just do this for bad things. It does this for good things too. A couple years ago, I was invited by this, it's a weird story, but I was invited by this billionaire to go to his private ecological reserve in the Yucatan over Christmas with his family. And so there and my family all goes, and I mean, it's just this unbelievable place. He's preserved something like 10 million acres. He's doing this wonderful gift to the planet. And we're living in these little huts. And so here I am on this week-long amazing adventure. And my brain, guess what my brain's doing? It's going, wow, isn't this great? And the next time we'll come, we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we'll do that. And every year we'll start coming. And because it's a tradition of their family, it's a big Mexican family, that they meet there for a week. And all of a sudden, I'm going to be there with them too, right? This is what my brain's doing. I've never seen them since. But my brain had a whole story about what was going to happen, right? And it was going to happen forever because this thing tends to concretize reality, this one. And of course, even when it was happening, I was going, hey, stop it. Enjoy this moment. Look at that beach. See that shell, because you may never see it again. That's this. So, part of why letting go of all of our beliefs, assumptions, conclusions that cause us pain is so difficult is because our brain is structured to do that. Oh, this is just like that. I knew it was always going to turn out that way. The story that I was thinking about when I was driving here, because the people live really near here, was, I'll give you an example of how we do it. So I knew these people a while ago, and every time I was introduced to them, at least 5 or 6 times, they pretended like they never knew who I was, ever been introduced to me before. I had to say who I was again. That's the data. That's this. What did this do? They don't like me. There's something wrong with me. Actually, my brain goes, those narcissistic jerks. They're so oblivious to reality that they cannot pay attention to the fact that they have met me many times before. This is causes of suffering, right? There could be a million other reasons why, besides being a narcissistic jerk, that they didn't know who I was 4 or 5 times in a couple years. Okay, so, I mean, there could be. Okay, so what can we do? What can we do about this phenomena, the way our brain is structured? It's structured that way. We can't change the structure. So what can we do about it? So the big thing that we can do about it is be aware of it happening, right? And this is where Buddhism meets neuroscience in one of the many places it does. Whether you call it awareness, whether you call it the witness self, the term I prefer is what Daniel Siegel at UCLA calls mind sight. I love that term. The ability of the mind to perceive what the mind is doing. The more that we have mind sight, the more that we can recognize when this is going haywire. And the more that we can experience bottom-up processing as it is occurring. And so what creates mind sight? What creates the ability of the mind to perceive what the mind's doing? The very best thing that they know of is meditation. Because it's the practice of observing the mind. So the more that you strengthen the ability to observe your mind, the more that you know when your mind is going off on crazy places. So that are going to just cause you suffering. So a regular practice of meditation, the way I like to think about it, is like lifting weights for my mind so that I can see what it's doing so it doesn't drive me so nuts. And the practice of noticing, this is what Siegel talks about in his book Mind Sight and the Mindful Brain, by the way. If you're interested in more about this, you can read it in those books. He says it's the noticing that you've gone off track and coming back. That's the practice. It's not staying there. It's the noticing when you've gone off. That's the mind sight, the recognition. And so the more that you do that and bring it back, then the more you'll be able to notice in the moment, my brain is making up this whole crazy story about these people who lived across from the church. So that's one thing that in terms of strengthening the muscle, and what I'm going to talk about in these other two things, mind sight is, to my understanding, our greatest ally in letting go of the thoughts that torture us. Let me give you a really, really specific practice, however, because it's really good if we work out every day, lifting those barbells. 10 minutes a day is what the research from UCLA shows of mindfulness meditation is enough to strengthen the muscle to create this capacity. It's not duration, it's frequency that they've discovered. It's 10 minutes a day is way better. Now we're talking about not from a spiritual perspective, just from a strengthening the mind of mind sight perspective. 10 minutes a day every day is way better than like a month for 12 hours a day. And then not again. It's just like working out, exactly. So this, again, is all research that Daniel Siegel's doing at the UCLA Mindfulness Center. Okay, let me give you a really practical thing besides that. In the moment, when this part of your brain has gone bonkers about the past, the future, some kind of assumption, whatever, here's what you can do in the moment that really helps. What are the facts? Not my story about the facts, but what are just the pure, bold facts? That takes us back down to this. The facts are they couldn't remember my name. That's it. That's it. All the rest is up here, my assumptions and conclusions about that fact. And especially when you're dealing with other human beings whose brains are all doing completely other things with the facts, by the way, people. Have you noticed? I really understood this when what I do for work is I help people think. And I once had a job that I was working with 5 people on a leadership team. And I talked to them every week, separately. And every one of them told me a completely different story. They would have a meeting, one would get on the phone. It was a fabulous meeting. We finally got something accomplished. And the next person would say, that was a rotten meeting. And they all had their and I realized there really, really, really isn't such a thing as reality. No, there's only your reality because this part is making 90%. I mean, I'm not scientifically accurate. I don't know how much it's making up, but a lot. But this part, the fact, is the ground that you can connect with the other person on and with your own, with your own well-being. The fact is, I don't remember my name. Okay, so is the story I'm telling myself about that making me miserable or happy? Okay, so that's one. The second is this. Some of the stories that this part of our brain tells us are bigger and more dramatic and more of a charge than just these people are narcissists, although that has a connection to this other part for me. So, and this comes from a new understanding that psychologists are a way of, they're now talking about the issues that are very challenging for us. It used to be said we had neurosis, and it used to be said that we had a conscious and unconscious and a subconscious. Remember that? Yeah? Okay. Well, now they say that it's more like this. When we're very young, when you're in a threatening situation, something that scares you, something that's dangerous, either emotionally or physically or both, or you perceive that it could be or you feel like it is even if it maybe isn't, your brain comes up this way with a story about that. And then it's watching to make sure that bad thing doesn't happen again. And these stories, because they're very hooked into what our limbic system, which is our emotional brain, if the brain says it's a match for that story, we go into fight or flight. We become terrified. We believe it's a life or death situation. We're under attack, and we either have to fight, run, or freeze like a bunny and hope it's over soon. And these things are now being called schemas. And the person who's written really well about this is Tara Bennett Goldman in a book called Emotional Alchemy, if you'd like to learn what they are and how to relate to them. And so what happens is that so there's 10 sort of common ones. I'll toss out a few and maybe you'll recognize it. I can't be loved. People are out to get me. I'll never have what I need. What's another one? So there's 10 of them anyway, that they're common. Now you can have a variation of them, or you can have a special one of your own, or whatever, but the point is this. Your brain has made up a story. All of our brains have done this to try to protect us. And now it's the thing that's standing in our way of happiness, of joyfulness a lot of the time, because it's seeing that to make sure that we stay safe. Let me explain it. One of mine is the schema called emotional deprivation, and another mine is vulnerability. Those are my two biggies, okay? So I can't get what I want, and I can't take care of myself because I'm too little and frail and can't possibly cope. Okay? Those are my two. Now, would you ever guess that, just because you've seen me talk before, would you ever guess that about me? No, because it's not from our mature self that we've created these things. It's from our little 2- and 3-year-old self. Okay? So my brain made up those stories, and now it's watching. Make sure never to have that thing happen to you again. So, what happens to me when a client cancels? Or more than one client? Especially in the same week. Yeah, it gets triggered. And in my body, I feel like I'm going to die. And from your neocortex, from the the prefrontal cortex, going, come on. Everything's fine. But that other part is going, oh, I'm scared. This really bad thing could possibly happen. And I've worked with a lot of people around the issue of schemas, and you believe that holding on to that is your one protection in life. If I didn't have this thing to protect me, then something bad would happen. But of course, it's a story that's actually getting in my way. And that is the very last thing I want to let go of. I could let go of anything except my belief on that, because that I believe has protected me my whole life. It's false advertising, but nonetheless, I believe that. Okay, so you know when it's a schema when you're having a very intense emotional response to something that maybe someone else will go, why? It's no big deal. That's the clue. You think it's life or death, and other people are going, huh? So what do you do about it? How do you begin to let go of that thing that you believe is going to protect you? Interestingly enough, the techniques that James referred to earlier today are two ways to do it. You described sober. That's one of the techniques. RAIN. There's another one called SIFT, which is the same thing where you're looking at sensation, image, feelings, and thoughts. And what you're trying to do is disidentify, disconnect from this absolute emotional hijack of your limbic system of terror and get up into your prefrontal cortex where you can say, honey, you're 57 years old. You have a house, you have money in the bank, you're not going to be, go into bankruptcy because so-and-so canceled this week. So any of those techniques that James has RAIN in his book, Tara Goldman has some techniques in her book too. If this is something that resonates for you, then I would really encourage you to explore that. The third is something that I just learned that I'm really excited to share. Okay, so this also has to do with your limbic system. And that's this. Because we're not just psychological and mental creatures, we're social creatures, right? In fact, we used to be in tribes. And some neuroscientists say our brains are actually only up to the Paleolithic era in terms of their development. So it turns out that our brains are always not our conscious cortex, but other more primitive structures that connect to our limbic system, that are our limbic system, the fight or flight response, are scanning always the social environment for 5 things. They stand for SCARF. Ready? Hear them? Status. Am I going up or down in status? Certainty. Can I count on this or not? A stands for autonomy. Do I get to have freedom of motion in the way that I want to do it or not? R stands for relatedness. Is this person a friend or a foe? And F is fairness. So our brains, not the rational part, we have no conscious awareness that we're doing this, none, are scanning for this. They're either interpreting what's happening as a threat or a possibility of reward. Threat or reward. If we think it's a threat, then it turns on the alarm of the limbic system and we go through the fear response. If we see it's a reward, we get happy, but not as happy as we feel threatened when it's a bad thing. Right? Didn't you have Rick here say that the brain is Teflon for positive and Velcro for the negative? Yeah, that's got to do with this threat and reward system. So if we feel like we're being threatened in our status, in our certainty, in our autonomy, in our relatedness, or in fairness, then we get all fired up and our thoughts are racing and racing, racing, and we're off to misery land. I recently talked to a group of women realtors in Brentwood. And when I was driving there, they wanted me to talk about surviving change you didn't ask for, which is what my newest book is about. So I said, sure. And I live in Walnut Creek. I'm driving there, and as I'm driving, thinking, these aren't just realtors, but they're in the heart of the real estate meltdown capital in California, you know? It's like, so I asked him, I said, raise your hand if you've had threats to, I named them, you know, status, hands up, everyone. All 5, every person in the room. Okay, so what happens is, again, if we feel that these things are threatened, we get very upset. We either go into fight, flight, or freeze. So, what do we do about this one? How do we tell? Mindsight helps us know what we're doing. What are the techniques for getting out of it? There are 1 thing that does not work and 2 things that do, according to social science. So here's the one that does not work. Trying to pretend it hasn't happened. Suppression. I'm just going to say I really don't feel bad now. It turns out that not only does that heighten your emotional reaction, make you less likely to think rationally, impairs your memory even more, but it causes people around you not to be anywhere near you. No, I'm not kidding you. I did not make this up. This is the research. Because their blood pressure goes up when you're suppressing a sense of threat on for any of these things. People around you's blood pressure goes up. It's because we have these things, mirror neurons, where we can feel the emotional intention of another person. So even if you're going, oh, no, I'm fine, they can feel it. And they don't want to be around you. And it doesn't help you at all. Okay, 2 things. And what's amazing is they loop right back to these other techniques that work in these other 2 domains. The science says there's 2 things that work. One is what the scientists call labeling. And it's just exactly these techniques like RAIN and SOBER, which are you just name, to take you down to here, the bottom processing, what is going on without a story. The objective, I feel scared. I feel threatened. Just the naming of it, okay? And I don't know why, but what they've discovered, is that if you say it out loud, it works even better. It dampens emotion, so it calms the limbic system down, and it gets you into your prefrontal cortex. That's why when you tell your friend how bad you feel better, right? It's because if you name it out loud, it works even better. But remember, it's got to be the absolute, just the fact. No, and that means I'll end up on the street, and no. That's this part, telling a story. It has to do something with your schema. No, just what are the facts? And this labeling your sensations and your thoughts and your images helps you understand what your brain is doing. And again, calms it down, the limbic system. So labeling is one. And the other is what psychologists call reframing, which is how can I look at this situation in such a way that it is not a threat to me? So gratitude, for instance, works always because it takes whatever the situation is and says, what's the upside of this? Or what else can I enjoy in my life? What else can I appreciate? So any time that you can say, all right, this is going on, so you tell yourself the facts, and then you say, how could I look at this in a way that's a positive way that brings me, in James's word, more well-being? It dampens the limbic system's response and gets you back into your thinking brain, and then you're not being tortured so much from your thoughts. Do we have like 2 minutes for questions? Okay. Anyone got questions, thoughts, wonderings, ahas? Of course. I mean, I didn't say that those threats weren't necessarily true. It's that part of our brain that we're not aware of is tracking, could this be rewarding or could this be threatening? It doesn't mean that we're just making it up that it's a threat. If you suddenly become paralyzed, your autonomy goes way down. That's a reality. Absolutely. That the limbic system response to that, at least initially, would be pretty strong, right? You'd be scared. Yeah. So yes, in a certain way, the limbic system doesn't differentiate between the reality of something bad happening to you and your story about something that could possibly happen. That's the part that's really important. So when it's something real, that's one thing. But how much do we, I mean, I'm not saying letting go of responses to things that are real. That's why I said get the data. What I'm saying is, well, let's look at the ones that we're just making up in our heads. Let's do something about those. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, is there research on the tendency that we have to actually try to go out and make these things happen that are our stories? Is that accurate enough? Yeah. Yeah. Well, how much that's this way and how much of it's what you're perceiving, I don't know. I don't know. I have not seen any research on that. Yeah. Exactly. How much of it is that you're perceiving the world through the green glasses and so therefore looks green to you? And how much of it is that you're attracting all this greenness as a result? I don't know. But I don't want people to interpret this as then you're trying on purpose, that it's your fault bad things are happening. You know, that's the first noble truth. Suffering is part of life. And so, you know, it's not something that I don't believe we're trying to make these things happen, but I have never seen any research. Are you ready? We have a couple other hands up. What are you? Yeah.
Are these all laid down in early childhood, or do you keep getting these? Do you have more limbic reactions that get sort of set and can get triggered later?
Yeah. Well, that's what post-traumatic stress disorder is. Is that it's like a motion detector on an alarm, you know, be oversensitized. And that can happen anytime if you have a traumatic event, you know. I mean, my sister was raped when she was in her early 20s and every fall, when the leaves start falling, she was in New England, and every time the leaves fall off the trees, she gets scared. It's been 30 years. So, you know, a traumatic event can also tell our limbic system, never let this happen again. And we're looking for that. So leaves falling, danger. So yeah, it can happen at any time. It's just that when we're little, the rational part of our brains hasn't yet been wired up. We're very right hemisphere, which is metaphoric, imagistic feeling, when we're little. And so we're trying to understand things before we have the rationality to understand them. That's why it's those ones that are laid down really early are really set in there. We believe them really strongly. One last question, yeah?
How is this connected, if at all, to intuition? Because I understand there's a lot of nerve endings in the belly that are now connected to the sensing of whether something is actually, whatever, I don't know what you want to call it, emotional intelligence. And how does that sync up with sort of using the rational mind to discern what's real and what's not?
Yeah, I don't know. But what I would guess is that, so what you're referring to is that they've discovered that there's neural nets around our gut and our heart. And that therefore there really is a wisdom of the heart, there really is a gut intelligence. And I would guess that those are more closely aligned to bottom-up processing, because it's the senses that we're getting here, rather than all the stories and assumptions and conclusions that we have from up here. I would guess. So thank you.